Welcome on in, golf fans. It's your boy Gsluke here with our DFS and betting live stream for round 4 of the Tour Championship. Whether you're watching this live with us or over there on the replay crew, I appreciate you guys stopping by to get all of the info out there for tomorrow's slate, and I'll make sure to go out there and bring you guys the goods out there for Sunday. So I'm going to cover everything out there for tomorrow's slate. So whether it's the weather, look at the DFS side, ownership out there for all 30 players, something that we're going to talk about here together, and over there on the Underdog and Prize Picks side, whether you're looking for some prop advice out there for Sunday, we're going to have you covered there too. So we'll go through some pin locations, a little bit of a look at the stat averages out there for Saturday, all of that to help you out there with your process. So the one thing here is going to be a little bit quicker, a little bit more concise this time around, as I have an earlier dinner reservation tonight. As we're going to early start with the golf. It's 10 a.m. Also a 10 a.m. checkout time out here with the Airbnb. So got to keep things moving a little bit quicker out here. But hopefully you guys are having a fantastic Saturday yourselves, or having a good week when it comes to your golf exposure. And as I said, are ready to get after it out here for Sunday's action. We'll go ahead and start it off first off with a look at our presenting sponsor, which of course are our friends over there at the Ship It Nation. Ship It Nation are a great source for all your needs with DFS, not just what we have over here on the golf side. So whether it's over there with football in a few weeks, we've got basketball, NASCAR, all those different sports that you see on the screen right there, covered over there by the Ship It Nation crew. So if you're somebody that is playing a wide variety of sports, they're a great resource that won't price gouge you out there that you can use for all of that kind of content. So make sure to check them out. If you guys haven't already, use code Luke10 out there for a discount off any membership. And as I said, the presenting sponsor of the live stream, and an awesome crew that they have over there on that side. What's going on? Joseph says, yo, Lukey, can Kawa do it? And dinner was great, by the way. I enjoyed it last night. I've got to say, first night's dinner was by far the best. That was Italian. I'd say last night was number 2. And then, believe it or not, that restaurant that I really liked was number 3. It just wasn't as good this time around. Didn't hit the same out here in 2024. So we'll have to see how tonight's dinner ends up shaping up. But tonight's dinner, rather than a steakhouse, is a seafood-based restaurant. So we'll have to see how they compare out there to the different restaurants. But has been a great stay up here in Atlanta, great hospitality. Nothing I can say to complain about the time up here, other than it's been hot up here the last 4 days. So definitely a little bit exhausted after the weekend, but super excited to see what happens out there tomorrow, and to get to football season out there for next week. So of course, Thursday night football, we got that to look forward to the entire season out here. It's a good time to be a sports fan. So it is a little bit bittersweet towards the end of the golf season, but at least it coincides with a happy time of the year out there with football. Let's talk about this golf course from today, which definitely got a little bit harder out there for round 3. Now, we mentioned on live stream that the pin locations look a little bit stiffer out there for Saturday, but I thought they might move up a tee box or two out there on hole number 8 or 17, and we didn't really get that. And in fact, on the par 3s, rather than moving them up, making them a little bit more scoreable out there for moving day, they were pretty hard, all things considered. So you can see the scoring average went up a little bit compared to days 1 and 2. Round 1 was about 2.5 under, it was about 2.27 under there in round 2. And then today it was only about 1.6 under par. So obviously trending towards, maybe a 1.5 under par score. And on Sunday, if they move up hole number 8 or move up number 17, maybe it does get back to a whole 2 strokes under. But you'd have to imagine that they're going to be pretty tricky pin locations, just like they used out there for Saturday. So I think for tomorrow, it's going to be much of the same of what we saw out there for today, which was a slightly higher bogey rate, a little bit harder scoring to come by. And unless they do move up 8 or 17, it's probably going to be about a 1.5 under par scoring average. But we do have to put the asterisk on it, as moving up either one of those 2 holes would have a pretty drastic effect out there on the scoring, and coincidentally also the birdie average out there for round 4. So that's what I'll say about the course. In terms of weather, again, trying to keep this one a little bit quicker out here, it's going to be flat, right? As we've said for the entire week, when you have 30 players, it's going to be next to impossible to go out there and find an edge, especially when a majority of the play tomorrow is going to be under 3 miles an hour of sustained winds. So they're starting earlier as well. If you didn't hear the broadcast out there from PGA Tour comms, they're going to be starting at 10 a.m. local time, as opposed to around 12 or even 1 p.m. like you had for some guys out there today. It's going to be an earlier start because of some potential storms in the afternoon, which might make things a little easier as the course might be slightly more receptive earlier in the day, but it's not going to lead to an edge between like the early or the late guys. So we're still going to have to consider some late starters because there are placement points in play, but that's not why we're going to be shading towards that side of the player pool. The guys up top are going to be getting placement points. They're starting up there in the top 5, top 10. That's why we're probably going to have slightly more of those players out there in our lineups as compared to some of the early starters, and not so much that they're getting the better side of conditions. So that's what I'll say about the course. We'll circle back to some of these scoring averages, birdie averages, all of that when we talk about props. But let's talk through the DFS side. And as I said, go ahead, throw any questions that you have down in chat. But we're going to go through this one rather quickly. As I said, I got to get out of here in about 25 minutes. I'm going to make sure that we can touch on everything. Maybe not in full this time, but at least make sure we touch on all of those important topics. So let's start off with our plays out here for Showdown, which again, this isn't out here just to give you guys a player pool for tomorrow, but more so to tell you guys or guide you through your process of selecting your player pool, which there should be different factors that you're looking at to go out there and find the best plays. And out there for Sunday Showdown, it's a little bit different than what we had for rounds 2 and 3. Rounds 2 and 3, a lot of it was about ceiling potential, about raw scoring averages, raw scoring projection out there for rounds 2 and 3. Rounds 4, you still have that raw scoring component, which is, by the way, like 3/4 to maybe even 80% of your scoring out there for Sunday. But then you have that other 20, maybe 25% that are placement points that are a huge factor for main slate. We talk about that every single week, but for Sunday Showdown are also a massive factor that we have to consider. And so the reason why, Scotty Scheffler up top, despite being 50% owned is in my player pool, is because if he goes out there and he shoots like -4 tomorrow, that goes out there and wins this event, there's going to be a next to no chance that he's not in the optimal lineup. There are other guys you could say that about that are starting up there in the top 5 that go out there, shoot someone like -4, -5 for sure would be a deadlock out there to be optimal. If they're going to get those placement points, which top 5 is like 5-6 placement points up there for the premier spots. First place, I believe, is like 12, it might be 13 points that you're getting out there for first place. Either way, it's about like 2.5 birdies you're getting out there for getting the guy that finishes in first. If you're getting some of those top 5 finishers, it's like getting an extra birdie on top of their score. So if they're shooting -4, that's why I said -5 is like a for sure lock. It's like them going out there and having a -6 round. So that's why that matters. It's why, especially for like the large field GPPs, the large field contest, it matters to go out there and try and get the winner, maybe a few other guys in that top 5, but it's not the end all be all. So you're going to see a few guys like Scotty that I'm out there using that are relatively high owned, but then you're also going to see guys that don't have that top 5 potential that I'm playing because of the fact that they can go out there and just go out there and raw score, which is still a factor out there in your Sunday lineup. So Scotty, of course, would be an example of a piece of chalk that I'm eating, which would be hard not to want to look at when he has that 5-shot lead. So he's about 50.5% owned. You can see all of the ownership on the screen, by the way. So if you're curious about any ownership numbers, well, you've got all of them up there at your disposal. Just let me know if you need me to scroll up or down to get you to what you're looking for. So Scotty, I think it's pretty straightforward. I don't think we have to talk about that one all that much. I am playing him in lineups despite that high ownership number. Rory McIlroy down here at $9,500 would be an example of a slightly lower owned play. Wouldn't be a diamond in the rough, right? You're still paying a whole $9,500 out there for Rory. He's also still 18.1% owned. So still definitely a lot of people that are still playing him in lineups. But Sunday Rory, when he's out of contention, has shown us plenty of upside out there in the past. And you've seen it before, right? When he's in contention, he can go the complete opposite direction. But you give him like no chance to go out there and actually win the golf tournament. And sometimes it's like you're looking at prime Tiger Woods. So I'm going to play Rory in this kind of scenario. I considered an Aubert as one of the highlighted plays on the stream. There's a few other guys in this range, like even Hideki at -12. You can see he's only about 19.9% owned. So any of these sort of plays, can be an Aubert, a Rory, or a Hideki, are going to fit that same kind of mold over here. They're not going to get you a ton of leverage out there in your lineups, but at the same time, they are going to give you a little bit of differentiation compared to some of these chalkier guys starting in the top 5, top 10. So those chalkier options, as you can see on here, would be guys like a Sam Burns, a Wyndham Clark. If you go up a little bit further, Colin Morikawa starting in second is definitely a little bit more popular, as you guys could have probably guessed ahead of time. So if you're looking to get a little bit different off of those sort of options, a Rory, even though 18.1% isn't low owned out there by any means, is low owned when you look at him in comparison to some of the other plays. So that's what I'll say about the Sunday Showdown, is that you shouldn't be playing all of the chalk up top. And in fact, Scotty is one of the few chalky guys that I'm using out there in my lineups. Out of a Colin, out of a Sam Burns, Wyndham Clark, Adam Scott, and then Sahith Theegala down here at $7,600. I believe I'm only playing one of those options. And if I end up playing anything more than one, I think it was two at most that I took out of those like 5 chalky options. And I believe, at least if memory serves me correctly, that my initial player pool only has one of those guys out there in my player pool. So just because I'm using a Scotty, right, using him as a highlighted play here, does not mean that I'm mixing in all of that chalk towards the top. So, if you're going to take somebody as a conviction play starting with a bunch of ownership, just commit to them. Play them in at least 2/3 of your lineups, maybe even like 70, 75%. And in the case of the Scotty, you might even want to argue for going out there and locking them in every single lineup. Moving down a little bit further, you've got a $7,800 Victor Hovland, and the price tag, I think, says enough right there. I mean, he's just far too cheap for the kind of upside that he brings, and that's why I think Scotty Scheffler lineups are going to be so easy to build, and why he's up there at a whole 50% ownership, and also why Morikawa is still 40% owned himself. I think because of how soft the pricing is, and I guess we'll go through this before I mention why I like Morikawa, is because you have guys like Hovland at 7,800. I mean, you've got guys at $7,000, 7,100 that are guys that are normally 8,500 to $9,000 out there at major championships. Because you have that kind of value on this showdown pricing, if you wanted to go Scotty and then a whole $10,000 Morikawa as your second man in, it's not as infeasible as it would be for most showdown slates. So I think that if you wanted to go that direction, I guess you could with a Victor Hovland, but I like him even if I'm not going with that double chalky spend up. Like I said, I'm not playing Morikawa out there in my lineups. So somebody like Victor Hovland at $7,800 is more so just a player that I'm using as a filler option, cheaper, right? Maybe opens up a little bit more salary with one of my other spots, but a high upside, high scoring player, the kind of guy that is very aggressive, that'll go after these pin locations, and he's only about 18.5% owned. You see, I got Sahith at about 31%. A Sun GM here at -11 is somebody that has a slightly more reasonable ownership number. Definitely not low owned over there at 23.4%. But what I like about Sunjay is that the ball striking stats have been pretty sustainable this week. I got to see him out there in person. Looked a little bit off out there on his back nine, but in general is the same kind of score as a lot of the other guys in this range, if not maybe the best scorer of anyone at this mid 7Ks. And compared to Sahith, I've got their fantasy score projection, which, by the way, if you're over there on the Patreon page, you can compare them over there. It's about 1.5 points off. So, yeah, Theegala is projecting a little bit better because of his leaderboard position, but it's not by very much. And you can see over here, he's like 1.5 times higher owned out there than a Sun GM. So for me, if it's only going to be like a 1 fantasy point projection difference out there between those two players, give me the guy that's only 23, maybe 24% owned as compared to the guy that might be 31 to 35% owned out there in GPPs. You've got some ownership on a Shane Lowry. I guess that's worth pointing out. Aaron Ride, 18.7%. A lot of that is just because of his price tag. He's too cheap there at $6,900. Benny Yan also starting towards, you can't even say like the top end of the leaderboard, but another guy that I think will get some ownership just based on the fact that he's a much better player than the price tag. A few guys that I want to point out that I'm getting to are like an Akshay for some differentiation, and then also a Robert McIntyre down low. Both players would normally be like $7,500 at a major championship, right? Like maybe $7,000 out there in a showdown slate towards the weekend. And now you're getting, first off, Mac at $6,000 and then a $6,600 Akshay Bhatia. It just buys you so much flexibility towards the top end of the board. So I think studs and duds is especially viable on this sort of slate when you have value options like that to go ahead and mix in. And then even guys like Victor Hovland here at $7,800. So it's that kind of slate. I think you can go studs and duds if you'd like. And if you're trying to get a little different with your lineup construction, I think if you went balanced, if you avoided the guys from like Colin Morikawa up, right, avoided Scotty, Xander, Colin, I think that you could get infinite leverage to the field. Now, do I think that's a smart idea? Probably not, given the composition of this leaderboard. But if you did, no one is going to be doing that as well. So just know that the chalky build, what most people are going to be doing is going out there and probably taking a little bit more of a studs and duds approach, which personally, I tend to agree with a little bit out there in my exposure. So I'll be doing a lot of that out there in lineups, and hopefully it gives you an idea of some of the exposure that I'm getting to. In terms of building a few lineups together, let's do that now, give you an idea of what I'm thinking about when building lineups, which is a lot, right? Depending on which contest that I'm entering. My thought process for a cash lineup is drastically different than what I'm doing out there for GBPs. So for the sake of this, we're going to focus on the large field GBPs, the contests where you're trying to take down a rather large field, because that's where most of you guys are entering your lineups. Some of you might be cash builds, some of you might be out there and only single entries. There's always going to be people that are doing their own thing out there, but a vast majority of people that are watching my content and vast majority of DFS users in general are out there playing some of the larger field GPPs. Whether you're 150 maxing, some of you might just doing 5 to 20 lineups out there in those larger field contests. You've really got to be considering your goal out there in those contests. If it's a smaller field GBP, maybe you're not as worried about finishing in first place. Single entries, that certainly might be the case, right? Top 5, top 10 in a single entry is going to pay out rather nicely. So in those kind of contests, it's more about just playing the best plays. So for the sake of a round 4 showdown slate, that'd probably look like playing like 4 guys towards the top end of the board. So a good amount of chalk out there in that kind of contest, and then maybe 2 guys where you're really making a stand against the field. Now, what we're going to do here, right, is we're going to build a lineup out there for like the large field GPP, which has to be a little bit more different. So the difference with the large field GPP is that we're not just trying to go out there finish in like 5th or 10th. We want to finish first place because of how top heavy those payouts are. And then on top of that, we also want to make sure that when we win, or when we go out there and we select a really good player pool, that we're not playing against 50, 60% of the field in a lot of cases. And we also want to make sure that we're not duplicating ourselves out there with other players. So how we accomplish that is maybe by only taking 3 guys that are starting up there towards the top end of the board. Maybe you have one that's starting towards the middle. Maybe it's only 2 leverage options down there towards the bottom. But rather than being a little bit more chalk heavy than you would be in some of the smaller field contests, large field GPP, we want to force in some differentiation. So to show you what that would look like, starting up top, you can still use a Scotty Scheffler in these kind of builds, but that's where like an Obear or a Rory would kind of work as a second man in. Now, I wouldn't call this a true leverage option. We're going to call this more like the mid-level filler that you can use, but he's also not going to be a mega chalky guy that we have to worry about. Just for the sake of this video, and I'm going to use a little bit more chalk than I probably would in lineups, we're going to go down here and throw in I guess the Gala there at $7,600. We've got a Scotty at 50%. We've got a just under 20% Rory. We've got a nearly, actually, I think maybe even a little bit over 30% on Sahith Theegala. If this is going to be a large field GPP lineup, we've got our placement points between Scotty and Theegala pretty much right there. Heck, even McIlroy, right, might give us top 3, top 5 finishing position points. He goes out there and has the kind of round we're hoping for. Our last 3 spots here where we're going to get a little bit different. So if you went with a McIntyre, I think you could accomplish a lot of that. If you went up here and went with Benny Yan, you'd be doing that as well with guys that are under 15%. For your last 2 spots, this is where you might want to consider somebody like Henley as opposed to a Shane Lowry. Lowry starting in 8th would be great from the placement point position, but in a large field GPP, that would also be taking on a lot of ownership. So that's why I went with Henley as opposed to a Lowry there. That's why I went with an Ann down low as opposed to some of maybe the more popular options like an Aaron Rye. And then for our last man in, I don't know if you would have to leave a bunch of salary on the table here, but I think leaving $100, maybe even $200, $300 on the table wouldn't be the worst idea out there in this kind of build. I don't know if you have to force it in, especially if it's not like the really big GPP out there for Sunday, big $20 that they have out there for tomorrow. If it's in any sort of smaller field GPP, maybe you could spend all your salary and take a Horschel, or leave $100 on the table and take an Aaron Rye. But if you're entering in a 10,000, 20,000 entry sort of contest, you might want to force your hand here a little bit just because it is a 30-player field. So this week's a little bit different than most. It's a little bit wonky. I know some people might be a little bit sick and tired of it now that we have football starting and whatnot, but it's the last round that we have to work with out here with this kind of format. So that's what I'll say for the lineup construction stuff. Don't want to be too long-winded from that aspect of things, but now going to focus over there on the prop side and bring you guys all the goods for that. So in terms of props, the course played a little bit harder than what we saw for days 1 and 2. That was kind of to be expected, but I would say maybe played a little bit harder than what most people were expecting. And out there for Sunday, they could throw us a little bit of a curveball, as I mentioned, out there with holes number 8 and 17. But if they don't do that, I would project the scoring average about 1.5 under par. Pins are likely going to be tricky, especially on some of like the harder holes out there. The only curveball, only difference I think we could really see with scoring would be if they went out there and they changed up what we had for the tee boxes on a few of those holes. So that'll be something that I'm trying to really monitor out there tomorrow morning. But in terms of conditions, birdie average, probably around 4.5 per round. I think that's a pretty good barometer. Maybe goes back up to like 4.6, 4.7 if they move up 8 or 17. Bogey average might even go up to like 2.5 per round. That would depend if they go out there and they move back some of the par 3 tee boxes. I think with the tricky pins, that's why it's going to be a little bit higher than what you saw for days 1 and 2. Fairway average probably won't move much. And then this green and regulation average, a lot of that is going to depend on what they do with the par 3s, but it's likely going to be sub 12 like you've seen for the last 2 rounds. The real question is whether it's like 11.5 like you saw out there for round 2, or 11.25 or maybe even lower if they go out there and they make things a little bit more difficult. So it's going to be tough to say that before we see the pin locations, which speaking of, let me go ahead and see what they've got out there for pins. If they have them up, we can do a little bit of a look through them. Again, I've got to keep this one a lot quicker than normal, just because of the fact I've got dinner here. But yeah, no pin locations, unfortunately. I will be taking a look at those when we get those in an hour or so, but unfortunately we'll be off live stream. So for the sake of this, let's go ahead, just take a look at the Underdog and Prize Picks boards and see what we're doing here. And Cap, I see you got a question down there. We'll answer that here in a second. You said, do I like Finau or Hoge as a bounce back? So neither one are my favorite plays, if I'm going to be completely honest with you. Reason why I don't love Hoge would be the ball striking stats the first few rounds. Even Tony Finau was maybe a little bit rusty compared to his standards the first few days. So they're not my favorite plays, but what you are getting with both is average to below average ownership. I would say that Hoge for sure is going to be like sub 13, 14%. Maybe at most like right around 13% owned. Somebody like Finau, maybe sub 15, 16% owned out there at the very most. So you're going to be able to get some leverage out there on those sort of players. So they're not my favorite. Part of that is because of the stats that we've seen for the first 3 days, but you don't always want to overreact to some of the shots gained metrics because there's a reason why they haven't played well the first 3 days, right? There's a reason why they're towards the middle to bottom end of the leaderboard. They're much better than that long term. So for them to turn it around would not be that surprising, is what I would say about those kind of players. But in terms of what we're going to do here for props, I'm not sure if we have prop boards quite yet. If we don't, we can just talk about my general strategy, which for Underdog and Prize Picks is likely going to be some overs on birdies, particularly like for elite tier players. I think even if they don't move up holes 18 or 17, that your elite tier players are likely still going to average 4.75, maybe 5 birdies per round. If the field average is about 4.5 per round, so those elite tier guys are going to be right about that sort of number. So if we get some decent 4.5s, I'll probably consider adding those over here in Underdog. But at the same time, also some overs on birdies. Bogeys, I should say. Sorry, birdies, yeah, you already know that, right? Like the overs at 4.5. But for bogeys, if we get some guys at 2, or maybe even some scrubs going off early at 2.5, because the pins, I think the tee boxes might be a little bit trickier tomorrow. At least that's something that they typically do out there for Sunday on the PGA Tour. it might be like a 2.5 bogey average. And for those guys going off early, the guys that aren't playing well, it might be like over a 3 bogey per round sort of average. So I think that we could look for some overs on bogeys, potentially even some overs on birdies at the same time. And it's kind of been that kind of week. I mean, you can see over here, the average birdies and bogeys per round has been about 7, which is higher than your tour average. Normally it's about 6, maybe 6.5 birdies and bogeys per round. Sometimes it's even lower than that, depending on the event that we're at. This golf tournament, a little bit more scoring volatility. Sometimes you've seen it get to like 7.5, maybe 8 out there for given tour events, but 7 is up there in like the top 5 or 10 out there in tour when it comes to the lowest par average out there at a golf course. So that's what I'll say about our strategy. Let me see what we got on Prize Picks. So Prize Picks does have a board up, which compared to the last few days is surprising. Normally, Underdog has been the first one to the party over here, but let's refresh it. Maybe that's why. You can see my location. That's okay. Underdog. Where we at though? So still no board posted over there on that side, but we do have some stuff posted over here on Prize Picks. So thanks for saving us, giving us a few lines to look at. And of course, Kep, I've got you down there. It's a slate for the hardcore fans, it looks like. We've only got 22 live viewers here. Part of that probably because of the fact we have college football going on. But if you're one of those 22 people here, let's go ahead, get those like buttons up. Let's go ahead and hit the like button too if you're also watching this on replay. I'm sure a lot of you probably going to tune in after some of the football games. So if that's the case, no bad intentions at all, no bad feelings, I should say, towards you. But go out there and smash the like button if you're part of that crew too. Let's see what we're doing here. So in Prize Picks, they've got guys at about the same numbers today, if not maybe like 0.5 higher in a few cases, which I thought they'd be at least 0.5 higher out there with the scoring conditions, but I don't know if they've adjusted it enough, right? They've got guys over here at like 1.5 under par, which is the scoring average. And a lot of these guys down here at 69.5 are not average players. So, for example, Chris Kirk, a Pavon was coming in like losing 2 strokes per round. These are like clearly some of the top 5 worst players out there in this sort of field. So if it's going to be about a 1.5 under par scoring average, that would really be dependent on whether they move up hole 18 or hole number 17. If they don't, some overs on strokes here could make a little bit of sense. Let's look at the birdie stuff. So I mentioned maybe some overs at 4.5, but it'd have to be the right kind of player. And what I'm seeing here is a lot of scrubs at 4.5 birdies. So you've got your guys like Chris Kirk, Horschel, Straka down there at that kind of number. Your best sort of players, I guess you'd have to choose from would be your Sanjays, the Galas, maybe a Lowry, Adam Scott you'd consider for an over at 4.5. But these aren't the kind of guys that I'd be hoping to play for that kind of projection. So I guess we'll have to see what Underdog ends up doing out there for their board. But for strokes, I think there could be some fades out here in strokes, especially for like some of your lower tier guys that are teeing off early. And that's not weather based. That's just the fact that they're out of form. Also, some of the lower tier guys on the field, or even some unders on birdies out here for that same crew of players. The early guys, the out of form guys, the lower tier players to begin with, because they don't have the kind of guys I'd want to take for like an over at 4.5 birdies, which is unfortunate. So I think that when we get this Underdog board, which could be posted at any second, so that's why I keep refreshing it over here to see if we can potentially cover it out here together. It's looking like fades might be a little bit easier to find out there for tomorrow than what we're going to have out there for positive stance plays. But if you're going to do anything out there for a positive stance play, I think Sunday, if you can find a really soft strokes line, of course, go out there and take it. But birdies or better is probably going to be the safer bet. I could see a little bit more of bogeys out there Sunday because of some of these pin locations. So that would be my take out there for that given slate. See, any questions? Looks like we're good to go on that. So we're going to go ahead, cut it off now. It's 30 minutes exactly at my cutoff point out here for this live stream. So hopefully you found this quick little preview out there for Sunday helpful out there for your exposure, and you're ready to go out there and crush it for everything that you're doing. So best of luck out there in your lineups, out there in large field GPPs. Best of luck with all the prop slips that you're getting to. Of course, make sure to check out our presenting sponsor, Ship It Nation, if you guys haven't already. And for the DFS sheet that you saw in this video, make sure to check out my Patreon page, which is different than Ship It Nation, by the way. So just want to clear up any confusion that people may have there. For that kind of stuff, for the spreadsheet that you see, make sure to check out my Patreon page. There's a link in the description of this video or live stream. If you're watching this out here live, on there for $15, the golf DFS tier is how you can get all of the showdown sheets. Unfortunately, probably not the best time of year to go out there and join that, as we've got a week break out there before the next event. But join on up whenever you guys feel comfortable out there doing that. And for all the prop slips that I'm taking out there on Sunday, make sure to check out the golf prop tier out there on that side. Same thing, right? It's $15 a month, gives you all the different prop slips that I'm entering, and of course all the reasoning behind them as well. Football will be starting. We're going to have that out there for Thursday. We'll have the same sort of stuff out there for football. It's going to be $15 for DFS the entire year for every single month. Then I'll include Showdown and Main Slate every single week. And then same thing out there for props. So that'll be starting as soon as Wednesday out there with that content. So keep an eye out for some football videos throughout the week, football content over there on the Patreon page out there for paid members, and subscribe so you don't miss any of that to come. Best of luck, as I said, smash that like button if you guys haven't already, and best of luck out there with your exposure.